I don't know. I want him to be able to buy it. I think the best way to get it is to buy it.
Leigh, why bring up Greenland?
And we want things like healthcare and education and new roads and bridges and those kind of things. And we're going to spend, what, $700 billion to buy an island that isn't for sale?
Trump's Greenland ambitions sparked a firestorm on Abby Phillip's show. And what happened next reveals everything about where we are as a country. The panel included Scott Jennings, and the exchange got heated fast. We're breaking down the key moments from this debate, examining what was said, what it means, and why it matters. Let's dive in.
You can't always get what you want, but if you try sometimes, you get Greenland. Tonight, the president himself is telling the Prime Minister of Norway that in part, if he can't have the Nobel Peace Prize, at least one that he actually won himself, he wants Greenland. He made the link himself in an actual text to the actual Norwegian Prime Minister. In it, he blames that country for not winning the Nobel. He claims he stopped 8 wars and added that he no longer feels obligated to think purely of peace because of the snub. He went on to, again, question Denmark's ability to protect Greenland and ended by writing, "The world is not secure unless we have complete and total control of it." The backdrop, of course, is Trump's near obsession with the Nobel Prize.
They will never give me a Nobel Peace Prize. Do I deserve the Nobel Peace?
If you mention
Well, maybe for the Abraham Accords. They gave it to Obama for doing absolutely nothing but destroying our country. I should get the Nobel Prize for every war, but I don't want to be greedy. I can't think of anybody in history that should get the Nobel Prize more than me.
So Norway's prime minister responded by reminding Trump that an independent committee awards the Nobel Peace Prize, not the Norwegian government. Over the weekend, Trump escalated his takeover bid by threatening new tariffs on European allies until a Greenland deal is reached. And in a new phone interview with NBC, the president again refused to take U.S. military intervention off the table as a means to get his way. Joining us now in our fifth seat, Suzanne Nossel, a senior fellow at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. And friends, Cameron, let me just start with you. I mean, who among us hasn't lost a peace prize and demanded an island?
Well, Trump is being very transparent about what he wants here, and he did the same in Venezuela. In Venezuela, he said this was about oil, and with Greenland, he's saying this is a personal grievance for which I am threatening military action. And he's basically playing risk because people hurt his feelings, or people ostensibly hurt his feelings. So I am appreciative that the president is being transparent about this. I would love it if he was more transparent about the human sex trafficking network that he was a part of, but you can't win them all.
Cameron's grateful that the president is being transparent about the Nobel Peace Prize and his desires for Greenland. Scott, what do you think about that?
You gonna let that sit? Are we gonna claim here on CNN that the president is part of a global sex trafficking ring, or?
Scott Jennings just doubled down on a position most Americans don't share. Recent polling shows the vast majority disagree with his take. Cameron Kasky's point reflected that broader consensus, but Jennings wasn't backing down.
Well, we're going to talk about the Epstein file. Scott, I will do the fact checking as we go along here. Repeat what you said about the global sex trafficking ring.
That Donald Trump was provably very involved with it.
Okay, we'll get to that later. I mean, Donald Trump has never been charged with any crimes in relation to Jeffrey Epstein. But
let's be adults here.
We'll talk about Epstein files.
Let's be serious.
Satisfied? Now answer the question about Greenland. Do you think the president's desire now for Greenland in his text to the Norwegian Prime Minister reveals perhaps something about Donald Trump?
Well, it is true that the government of Norway doesn't award the Nobel Peace Prize. That's true. It's also true that he would very much like to get one. It's also true that he probably deserves one. So all of those things are true. I also think that he very much wants Greenland for national security reasons. He has stated this time and again. He's worried about Russia. He's worried about China. He's worried about protecting this island. It is a vital area. They have critical minerals. We already have a military base there. We're already obligated to protect it anyway. He doesn't believe that Denmark can adequately protect it. So he's got an idea that it would be better under U.S. control. So did Harry S. Truman. So did Secretary of State William Seward. This has been an island that has been recognized by American presidents and diplomats for 150 years, that it would be a good idea for us to control. We bought stuff from Denmark before, the Virgin Islands, so it's not unusual for us to engage in these kinds of transactions. Whether this text exchange helps him get to a deal to buy it, I don't know. I want him to be able to buy it. I think the best way to get it is to buy it.
Leigh, why bring up Greenland then? I mean, why bring up the Nobel Peace Prize?
Scott Jennings defended the administration's position on protecting Greenland. But critics are asking a fundamental question. Protecting it from whom? The stakes are higher than most realize. Denmark supplies 75% of America's insulin. Danish officials have floated the possibility of restricting that supply if tensions escalate. A shift that wouldn't be easy to replace overnight. Beyond insulin, economists warn of broader consequences. When a superpower pressures allies, those allies can retaliate economically. The ripple effects could be significant. What's driving this push? Some analysts point to long-standing interest in Greenland's strategic location and resources. Others see it differently, arguing personal motivation is playing a role in foreign policy decisions. Here's what makes this moment unusual. Presidential actions that risk alienating key allies over territory aren't typical in recent American history. Jennings supports the administration's approach, but polling shows the country is deeply divided. Millions have rallied behind the idea. Millions more remain skeptical. The question isn't just about Greenland. It's about how far presidential power should extend, and what happens when ego and strategy become impossible to separate.
About this well thought out Truman-esque process, as Scott is suggesting, to get the island. Why say, and I was snubbed for the Nobel Peace Prize?
First of all, Donald Trump is being transparent about what he wants. He wants a Nobel Peace Prize because he wants what he wants when he wants it. He's being a brat. And as a mother, I'm telling you, this is a boy that's never been told no, and this doesn't belong to you. To Scott, I would say Greenland's not for sale. That's nice that America wants to buy it. They have said, we're not for sale. We do not want to be bought. The people in Denmark are saying, we're not selling it. So I don't know why we keep talking about it like America's the biggest boy in the room, and we have the most money, and we'll come in here and take it. And I would also say, if it is for sale, where are they getting the $700 billion they're suggesting they're buying it from? Because that would come from the American taxpayer. And we want things like healthcare and education and new roads and bridges and those kind of things. And we're going to spend, what, $700 billion to buy an island that isn't for sale? I think it's ludicrous. I think we're acting like the biggest brat. We look terrible on the world stage. And if you're part of NATO and then you start acting like you're not going to back up NATO, you're going to actually take things from them, then it makes us look terrible. And it's just poor leadership.
Talk about the world stage, Suzanne.
Yeah, look, nobody is in disagreement that Greenland is a strategic island, that we have interest there, that the protection of U.S. and European national security is implicated in Greenland, but we have all the access we need. I mean, the reason we did a deal with Denmark to put bases there, to put U.S. troops there, is because they recognize that, and they're willing to expand that deal, to renegotiate it, to give the U.S. the rights that it may need to implement if Trump wants to and is able to, a version of the Iron Dome that would protect the United States and North America. So the idea that we have to have complete control, he's admitted it's a psychological need that he has, not a need that is driven by U.S. national interest. He said that to a New York Times reporter. And so the cost that this is exacting, extorting the Europeans, threatening to impose these tariffs that now have Europe on edge, looking at a complete withdrawal and breakdown of the NATO alliance, the most successful alliance in world history that has lasted for, now nearly 80 years. That is an appalling cost to pay, price to pay for the American people for a kind of flight of fancy that's ego-driven. He admits that. I think it's great he's owned up to it because we can then size him up. But the Nobel Peace Prize is not a participation trophy. This is not, something that you're entitled to because you stomp your feet.
And just one last thing on the Nobel Prize. This is what he told NBC today. Of course, even after Norway told him they're not the ones who pick it. Norway totally controls it despite what they say he told NBC News. They like to say they have nothing to do with it, but they have everything to do with it, the president added. And then he goes on to say, I don't care about the Nobel Prize. This is a pretty strange way of saying you don't care.
John, I would agree with the president. He, quite frankly, doesn't care about the Nobel Peace Prize.
What evidence do you have? Is there any evidence you have?
Wait a second. We all were quiet when everyone was talking. If he did care so much about it, he would have stopped on this 8 times victory that he's had in playing in global affairs and stopping conflicts around the world. I know some people at this table may not agree, but the president has, in fact, utilized his place as a leader of the free world to stop conflicts around the world. And I would disagree with the point you made earlier. We just heard 2 people at this table refer to the president as a brat and conflated him removing a murderous dictator, which hundreds of thousands of people from Venezuela who call America home now cheered on and agreed with. That's what we just conflated what the president is doing, which I agree with Scott, is a national security, as you said yourself, strategic move. And if we don't get it, our near-peer enemies, Russia and China, absolutely have the same exact thought in mind, that they want Greenland. I think the president doesn't care about this Nobel Peace Prize business.
He just said
He
he's the
continues
one
to
who
go
wrote.
on.
If he doesn't care about it, why did he bring it up? If he
continues
didn't
to-
care about it, why did he write the Norwegian prime minister and say,
continues to
"I'm
go
linking
on.
the Nobel Prize to
The
my
president
desire
of
for
the United
Greenland"?
States, and I'll remind you, is the first president of the United States in contemporary history to not put us into a long-term land conflict around the world, and has played in 8 different conflicts around the world as his position leader of the free world and stopped conflicts from around the world. So I don't think he cares as much as he's saying, sure, I'm deserving because I've done things more than what people have done and gotten it for much less. I
Wait,
think
so
that's the
if
point.
Russia is one of our enemies, do you agree with the president's decision to invite Vladimir Putin onto the peace board for Gaza?
So now you don't want the president to negotiate.
That's
you don't
not what
want
he
him.
said. He
you
asked
don't
you a
want the
question
What
about
on
Russia.
earth are you talking
to
about?
come
Do you
and have
believe that
leaders.
Vladimir Putin, a war criminal like Netanyahu and Trump, should be on the peace board for
I'm
Gaza?
not going to dignify that with an answer. You're conflating world leaders.
because you don't have an answer,
Why not?
sir.
Of course I do have an answer, but
Let me
that's
hear it.
ridiculous. To conflate the things that you're talking about into one bucket is absolutely ridiculous, and it's not deserving.
It's what it is a bucket. It's called
The
war
larger
criminals.
question is really whether there's a strategic interest to be so heavy-handed to put the NATO alliance at risk for U.S. domination over this territory when we have a long history of working with the Danes, working with the Europeans to use the territory as needed. They've said, we're open to what else may be needed, what you may need to base or headquarter there, what technologies you may need to bring in. So why disrupt the whole global order in order to get single-handed U.S. control when it's clear the Greenlanders don't want that, the Europeans don't want that, the rest of the world sees that as an incredibly intrusive, disruptive move that undercuts the rule of law and the norm against the use of force. So, you know, what is the purpose? What can be achieved by kind of blowing up the whole system just to get single-handed control? There isn't a logic there.
One of the things that the Wall Street Journal was reporting earlier is that the vice president did host all of these countries that are involved, and they had a healthy conversation. They created a working group to talk about this. I think if the president does go after the island, he will utilize, it's my hope that he will utilize all of the correct avenues and approach with NATO and members of Congress and those types of things. Look, I'll be honest, in my opinion, I don't agree with using weaponizing terrorists for this purpose. I don't agree with that. But I think the president will use the diplomatic channels and the proper ways about going acquiring Greenland when the time comes.
You know, no one's actually objecting to that. I mean, I think everyone's saying,
Well, I
look,
think
if
there's
there
two
can be
people
a
at this table who are absolutely
negotiation,
neglecting
if
that.
there can be a give and take, if we can come to terms with the Danes and we need greater access, you know, so be it. And the Europeans
That would be
were
diplomacy,
repeating
which I
that.
think I would be totally for. What we're doing here now is not diplomacy.
Actually, that
it's
was
biggest
exact-
guy in the room will take what he wants when he wants, and that seems to be a Donald Trump.
On Abby Phillip's show, panelists Leigh McGowan and Tim Parrish went head-to-head with Scott Jennings over the administration's territorial ambitions. The exchange highlighted something beyond foreign policy. It exposed questions about how America allocates its resources. Here's the context. Greenland wasn't a mainstream Republican talking point until recently. Now it's defended as strategic necessity by some, dismissed as distraction by others. McGowan raised a pointed contrast. ICE's budget now rivals the military spending of entire nations. The US defense budget sits at $1 trillion, with proposals to push it to $1.5 trillion. Meanwhile, millions of Americans face potential bankruptcy from medical bills. The question on the table: why is territorial expansion prioritized while healthcare remains inaccessible for many? Critics argue this reflects misaligned priorities. Supporters counter that national security and economic interests justify the focus. But there's a longer-term concern. If the US strains alliances over territorial disputes, the economic and diplomatic fallout could take years, even decades, to repair. Future administrations, regardless of party, would inherit that challenge. So where do you stand? Is Greenland a strategic imperative or a costly distraction? Does the current budget reflect the right priorities? Or is there a disconnect between spending and the needs of everyday Americans? Drop your take in the comments. And if you found this breakdown valuable, hit subscribe. We're covering the stories that shape what happens next.